Hello guys, how are you all doing? My name is Rob of Ro2R Review and welcome back. So today's video is going to, as per usual, focus on the Nintendo Switch, a pretty unique subject and topic that I want to tackle surrounding Nintendo's console. Really excited to discuss it with you guys. It's an interesting time for me to do this and for this topic to have been rattling around in my brain. Because to be completely honest with you guys, I've actually barely played my Nintendo Switch in the past 2 weeks. Honestly, I've been so wrapped up in Monster Hunter World and Shadow of the Colossus and just other regular life things and work and whatnot, I actually really have not even turned my Nintendo Switch on to game in a while, which makes me sad. It's not really a bad thing. I mean, stuff has been coming out. Faye and the Bayonetta games, of course, I'm going to get to sometime soon, once I feel more complete with Monster Hunter World, and also once I finally get to the end of Shadow of the Colossus. So, I might not have been playing my Nintendo Switch a lot lately. However, we know there are some exciting games and stuff coming out pretty soon that are going to be really great to play, especially for me once that Dark Souls Remastered hits the Switch, man. Oh my god, I'm going to lose my mind for that. But even though I haven't been playing my Nintendo Switch much, that doesn't mean that I haven't still been thinking about it. And that brings me to the topic and the thing that has been, like I said, rolling around in this big old dumb brain of mine, and that is whether or not the Switch is the greatest console of all time or will become the greatest console of all time. Now, I know that is a huge question and a crazy statement, and to be fair, not a lot of people have actually been bringing this up. This is something that literally just popped into my own brain when noticing how there is still consistently so much stuff to talk about when it comes to the Switch. The fact that I myself can go weeks without playing it, yet still not stop thinking about it. All of us in this gaming community, in this Nintendo community, constantly have crazy, popular, and exciting things to talk about when it comes to the Switch. Nintendo has kept this hype rolling, even in this period that's, we definitely can't call it a drought, but it's a slower release period as far as game releases. I mean, let's face it, since the console launched last March, which is almost a year ago, by the way, we are creeping up on the 1-year anniversary. But since the console launched last March, we all experienced this insane launch year with all of these amazing games, most of them Nintendo, some of the best games Nintendo or any company has ever made. And then, of course, some great third-party titles, both AAA and indie, started to roll onto the scene. The eShop has just been exploding with so much exciting stuff. We've seen so many games, we haven't really felt like we've been in a period where there hasn't been a lot of new stuff to play on the Switch constantly. And while there has been a couple of notable releases so far in 2018, like the Bayonetta games I mentioned, Faye just came out, Celeste is a game that came out in January, which was of course multi-platform, but still apparently a really fantastic indie game. Still, with a few minor exceptions like an upcoming Kirby game, there just isn't a lot right now in early 2018 that we know we can be excited for. But still, the Nintendo Switch is always a hot topic. Everyone's thinking about it, playing about it, tweeting about it, making videos about it, myself included, of course, getting excited for things like Metroid and Kirby, and whenever we find out about Fire Emblem, rumors about E3 are already starting to come out. Not really many of them seem credible, but still the conversation is starting to happen. And so, what is the deal, man? What is the deal with the Switch? Why is this the case? Why is it hitting such a chord and a nerve with people in a good way that keeps it so successful? And are we looking at a situation where this crazy, weird, little, unique hybrid device might actually be the greatest console of all time? And like I said, that is an insanely huge question, but it's just how I've been thinking about the Switch. Okay, so let's get to brass tacks and discuss the main thing here. Is right now, currently, the Nintendo Switch the greatest video game console of all time? And I'm going to say no. Personally, I feel like it is absolutely not the greatest console of all time. But then the question becomes, will it become the greatest console of all time? Is it destined to be the greatest console of all time? And in that respect, I would say maybe. Now, if I'm being real with you guys, I think we need to take into account one huge thing here. This is actually, even though I'm about to spend another 10 or 15 minutes talking about this, this is actually almost an impossible question to answer, especially when the console is new. If anything, it's easier to assess a console's life and its status in the history of gaming once it's complete, which will become a part of the conversation here. You kind of have to get some space and separated from it and be able to look back on it and assess it from a distance, as in a distance in time, to really know this. But still, when you look even deeper than that, it's still almost impossible to answer, because just like any question like this, it's all about subjectivity, man. Everyone has different tastes, everyone has different opinions, so I'm not here to answer the question necessarily for everybody. I'm not trying to be this one guy, Rob, with this small little YouTube channel that will definitively state for all time and for all people, the Switch is the best console ever, or the Switch is not the best console. I'll discuss kind of how it kind of counts and what I think about it and what I think might happen for sure, but it's not really about making the definitive statement for everybody because we're all different. If you're going to talk about the greatest console of all time, or the greatest video game of all time, the greatest movie of all time, the greatest sports team of all time, you can kind of gauge that by stats and wins, but even still, the greatest sports team of all time, the greatest whatever, the greatest musician, artist, album, all of these things. There can be a consensus that a lot of people agree on, and of course we have rating systems in place to let us be able to put like a quantifiable number on things to know, does it have the highest number of all the other things? You can do that, but at the end of the day, still, it's not something you can answer for everybody. So this is an impossible question, but I like to tackle impossible questions because that's just fun for me to do. And so now I really want to dissect, while I don't think that the Switch is currently the greatest video game console of all time, could it become a console that is perceived by many to be the greatest video game console of all time? So in order to fully assess this crazy conversation and ridiculous video that I'm even making for you guys, tackling this impossible topic, I think we need to break down some of the factors that actually qualify for a great video game console, or even the greatest video game console. So we'll start with the first, most basic, most obvious, and easily the most important, and it's the games. It is the library of a console, the library of the Nintendo Switch, that I think would be, of all the different factors I'll talk about, the number one, biggest, and most important. How are the games? I mean, consoles are really defined by the quality of their games. There are other factors, of course, that go into that, such as the Wii U, a console which I think has incredible games and a wonderful library, one of the best libraries of any console or any Nintendo console, but because other factors came into play, which I'll even talk about here, that definitely prevents it from being perceived by anybody, even the biggest Wii U fan, which is me, as the greatest console of all time. You just can't do it no matter how good those games were. But when we look at the Switch, we look at the games we've seen so far, holy freaking cow, right now, the Switch is definitely on track to knock this out of the park and have one of, if not the greatest libraries of all time. I mean, all the obvious things we know. It launched with Breath of the Wild. It had Mario Odyssey. We got a new IP that was pretty darn good with ARMS. We got Splatoon 2, which was fantastic. Oh my god, another Xenoblade just, whatever, 2 years after the last Xenoblade came out. Like, exactly 2 years. It was December 2015 that Xenoblade Chronicles X came out, and then December 2017, we get Xenoblade Chronicles 2. How did they even manage to do that? But they did. And like I said, I'm not a big indie guy, but so many great indie games. Many of them are exclusive. The eShop has been on fire with quality games, and third parties have started to show up just in this first calendar year of the Nintendo Switch. And we know Nintendo has a lot of ammunition in the tank and a lot of great games and franchises that we've yet to see. Some of them we know we're getting. We know Pokemon, Fire Emblem, and Metroid Prime 4 are all on the way to the Nintendo Switch. And when you add that to the games that already have existed, and then we consider, do we get that Call of Duty and that Grand Theft Auto and these other huge franchises and companies on board? We're getting Dark Souls. You know, once we start getting more and more of those, if the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo as a company maintains that kind of support, both from themselves, Nintendo first-party franchises, and also from the third-party scene and the indies, and that is maintained throughout, I would say, the majority of the course of the Switch's life, yeah, man, it'll have that down in spades. It will have, like I said, not only one of the best libraries, but possibly, once it's all said and done, possibly it might even be the best library of any single console. Another huge metric that I think absolutely is important to consider when you look at if a console is a great console and or the greatest of all time, and it might seem superfluous, but I'm telling you guys, this really does matter in the grand scheme of things, and that is sales. Because I feel like sales gauges success, it gauges popularity, it gauges interest. And a console has to be interesting to the people to make the people want to buy it, to have the company make the money, to want to put more of the money back into the console and the games, and so becomes the cycle of life in the video game industry. That matters. And it helps kind of solidify it as basically something that made some sort of, you know, splash within the industry. I mean, you can have something like a Barry Sanders play for the Detroit Lions, who is, some people might even say, one of, if not the greatest running back of all time, but he didn't rack up the wins, and he didn't rack up the Super Bowl victories, or even Super Bowl appearances, and so that kind of tarnishes the legacy, right? Like, individually, the guy was an animal. He was insane, so crazy good. I missed the 90s football, man. That was a good time. Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders, in just the days of those two guys just being like the most awesome running backs. But anyway, the analogy I think kind of makes sense. He might have been individually great, but without a lot of the wins, and if we equate wins to sales, it doesn't really make that splash that kind of counts for its relevance. And it's because the sales can help gauge that interest that I think it really matters when we look at something like the Nintendo Switch, possibly being the greatest console of all time. I mean, I already made a Wii U comparison, and this kind of furthers what I was stating, where I think it had the games library on lock. Fantastic games, wonderful library on the Wii U, but it didn't have the sales. In fact, it had some of the worst sales of any console in history, and that absolutely holds it back from being the greatest console of all time. It's like, well, you got the library, but you don't have the sales. And so they offset each other, and so there's no way we can consider you in that high of a regard. Now, the Switch also is absolutely outperforming in that category as well, just like with the games library. I mean, we all know within the first year, it sold 15 million units, which A, means it already outpaced its previous console, the Wii U, in just 1 year, and B, has been breaking records within that whole time and shattering records for Japan and for America, fastest selling console in the United States, and it was like keeping pace with the PS2 in Japan and keeping pace with the PS4 in Japan, or maybe even worldwide. It's doing everything it needs to, and still it is lighting the sales charts on fire. It's not always #1 as far as we can see, but it's consistently selling. People are still interested, and with new games continuing to come, people will only be more interested. And so, again, without seeing the full sales picture, once the Nintendo Switch has completed its life, it's tough to really gauge this. But I think that when we can see that, we might be able to state, wow, it sold 40 million units in its life. Pretty darned good, but not best console of all time good. Or we might be able to say, it sold 90 million. It sold 120 million. It sold whatever the heck, 150 million. I mean, if those insane numbers are achieved by the end of the Switch's life, then we're talking. Now we're talking possibly the greatest console of all time. 2 more quick metrics I want to talk about in this video before wrapping it up here and coming to kind of my conclusion. And the first one of those is also the length of the life of the Switch, which I've already had to reference a couple of times in this video. I feel like we have to really wait and see what Nintendo truly plans to do with this console. They might do the bare minimum thing, which has been my guess until recently. My guess was, 4 years, 5 years or so, which is actually about standard for a console. And that's okay. That's actually fine. And in fact, I think a company could make the greatest console of all time and have it only have a 4 or 5 year life cycle. I think that if they just absolutely devastate in that 4 or 5 years, yeah, you might be able to achieve that. But I would argue that if you can achieve a longer life and keep that console relevant for that long and still selling for that long and amazing new games still coming to the console for that long, I think you're really showing that you have something truly special and magical when that happens, which is what happened with the PlayStation 2. And I think, while it is far from my favorite console of all time, I think a huge argument could be made for the PlayStation 2 being considered the greatest console of all time. I would listen to that argument and absolutely consider the factors if somebody wanted to present that to me. Again, not my favorite, but it does tick a lot of the boxes that I think qualify, and one of them is an insanely long life cycle. The Xbox 360 and the PS3 also had very long life cycles, and that was a little bit of a different scenario, and I definitely don't think that those consoles get up to that kind of quality of the top tier that we're talking about, but still, it makes a difference. And so it's really just another example of how waiting until the Nintendo Switch completes its run will let us know really where it stands in the annals of history, and if it can really be something that qualifies for that greatest console status. Because if Nintendo gets this thing up to 7 to 10 years, like recent comments from Nintendo have stated, and I even made a video about that recently, that becomes special because it shows a console doing that could be perceived as 2 ways. It could be perceived as, oh my god, they just ran the thing into the ground, they wouldn't let it die, they just shoved it down our throats and they wouldn't move on for too long and it became annoying. Or it could be, oh my god, the interest is so strong for this console, it refuses to die, people continue to buy it, they can't get enough of it, so we keep getting games released on it, so new relevant titles are being supported on that platform, and that means that the console has made that kind of splash that makes a difference. And making that splash really helps solidify you for this amazing status that we're talking about. Now, the last factor I want to touch on real quick here before ending this video is the impact and the innovation of a console. I think that those are 2 very, very important things. The innovation is a tricky thing, and I'll get to that in a second, but when we talk about impact, I think impact is kind of something that's really the result of the 3 main things I've talked about so far. How great were the games, how strong were the sales, and how long did the sales keep the system afloat? Those things mean that any system that drops and basically ticks those boxes in such a successful way, makes a huge impact on the video game industry. It sends ripples and shockwaves through the land, in usually a very good way, and means that that console, whatever it may be, made its mark. It made a permanent stamp, boom, just right here, setting its flag down. I am here to make a difference. I am here to show that I wanted to rock the world. Look at all these great things I did. Look at how much people loved me as a console and loved the games that I provided and bought it like crazy, and oh my god, I got all these great things. And like, that is it. That is the impact. That is the impact that PlayStation 2 makes. It is the impact that Nintendo Wii makes. And to be fair, that Wii didn't have the very long life cycle like a PlayStation 2 did. But it still lasted like, what, 6 years, and it nailed the games and it nailed the sales. So still, I think, not to mention the innovation part of the Nintendo Wii with the motion controls. And so when you're doing those things, you're making an impact. And making an impact means you're never forgotten. You're always remembered, and you're always remembered not for sucking, like the Virtual Boy. You're always remembered for being amazing, like a PlayStation 2, or a Nintendo Wii, or a Super Nintendo, or a PlayStation 1. 360. These are consoles remembered for being fantastic. They made an impact, and making an impact without question is 100% mandatory for being considered the greatest console of all time. And there's another way to make that impact, and that is with the innovation. Like I said, the Nintendo Wii had a lot of innovation. The Nintendo DS and 3DS had a lot of innovation. The Nintendo Switch, innovation, it's ticking that box so far for sure. Everything about the Switch and what the hardware is, the portable nature, the home console hybrid nature, the amazing Joy-Cons, which some people might not love, but I love. I love HD Rumble. I can't wait to see more uses of the IR sensor. I mean, the Nintendo Labo might even be taking the innovation to the next freaking platform here. I mean, it's so crazy what's going on there. And if more games and software continues to support the innovative nature of the Switch, then forget about it. I mean, it's that will lead to the impact. And so in wrapping this whole thing up, all four of these things really make a difference and affect each other. You gotta have a great games and a great library. You gotta have incredibly strong sales, a very long life supported by those sales, and great innovation that makes an impact in the video game industry. I mean, that is literally everything I just talked about in one cohesive package. That, I think, is what qualifies for something to be considered the greatest console of all time. So where does that leave us with the Nintendo Switch? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. I'm sure most of you guys can figure that out. It's too early to say, but there is no doubt that the Switch, at the very least, is on pace to become possibly the greatest console of all time, or perceived by many, many people to be the greatest console of all time. And of course, that perception is key, you guys. We have to remember, you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. One man's favorite console is another man's least favorite console. And so a lot of us are probably going to be looking at the Switch when all is said and done, if Nintendo maintains this amazing course, and be like, damn, that sweet Nintendo Switch, one of the best consoles ever, maybe the best console ever made. And then someone else sitting next to you might be like, nah, I didn't really care for it. I'm a PlayStation 4 guy. I thought that was the best console of all time. And you know what? No one will ever truly be wrong. I did spend 20 minutes yelling at you guys about these 4 or 5 factors that I think qualify for being a greatest console of all time. But at the end of the day, we can't forget, it's all opinion. We're all gamers with different tastes from different walks of life, and we all like and prefer different things. So I feel like when all is said and done, the Switch will absolutely go down in history as one of the most incredible, successful achievements of all time. I think it will make a lot of lists of the greatest console of all time, and it's pretty cool when you think about we're living in that area right now, because in 10 years, that'll be a distant memory. We'll be like, oh, remember when the Switch just came out? Remember how exciting it was the first time you picked your Switch off your dock and you had a brand new Breath of the Wild in your hand for the first time way back in 2017? That was the best. Eventually, we'll get there. And that's really going to let us understand how we look at the Switch in history. But right now, we're experiencing it. So let's just enjoy it. And hopefully you guys got something out of this really weird, random conversation that I felt like having with you guys. Obviously, I need to hear what you guys think about this. Do you think that right now, the Switch is the best console of all time? Do you think it has no chance at ever being the best console of all time? Or do you think that, like I say, once everything is said and done, we might be able to look back and say that, yes, it was the greatest console of all time? Maybe you hate the darn thing and you think this was the stupidest video, and you're like, the Switch is garbage, what are you talking about? It'll never be great. So whatever you feel, however you think, share it below. And I think that's going to be it for me today, guys. So, of course, thanks so much, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.